Yo ho ho and deck the halls with books of roleplay. Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this RPG review at this seasonal time of year I'm going to be reviewing Odyssey, the complete Gamesmaster's Guide to Campaign Management. Okay, so we're looking at the Odyssey, Complete Guide to Campaign Management, written by Phil Vecchione and Walt Chikanowski. Apologies if I've got the names wrong. This is an instructional book rather than your more typical RPG supplements that I tend to review, and I came to be reviewing this when I came across someone mentioning it very positively online in Google Plus in response to some of my queries about campaign management issues that I'd had recently. The book that I've reviewed is a PDF copy. It's 212 pages long with a very clear, crisp one-column layout, and the artwork used throughout it is excellent. Much as I often decry the old school versus new school labels, there is definitely something about the artwork that made me think of those old style D&D books with the black and white fantasy art. Very atmospheric, loved all of that. This is available from Drivethru RPGs, and I will stick a link down below in the description of this video so anyone who's interested in purchasing this excellent book can get hold of a copy of it. Okay, so what are the goals of this work? Well, this book is a collection of best practice material designed to teach you how to set up and manage an RPG campaign efficiently, and most importantly of all, how to minimize wasted effort so that as a GM you don't find either yours or the players' energy levels tapering off during the campaign and find it sort of petering out. How does the book go about this? Well, the book first of all makes a distinction between running a campaign and managing them, with the focus of the book being squarely on management. And this is all the activity that takes place between the sessions that both supports and prepares you for running that all-important game. The book has little asides from the two authors, and as it says at the start, Phil seems to be very much a preparation based GM, whereas Walt prefers to run with a little less prep and improvise a little more. It's great to see a book referencing these two different approaches and providing insights to both. Since I think on the spectrum from someone who prepares really heavily to someone who improvises all the time, most GMs would operate somewhere between those opposite ends of the scale. The book is divided into three very clear and consistent sections, which are starting a campaign, where it talks about setting it all up correctly and getting that initial spark going; managing a campaign, which is all about maintaining the campaign's health as it goes along and keeping it entertaining, perhaps most important of all; and finally, ending a campaign, how to wrap up a campaign well. Now, anyone who's seen my how to run a campaign videos will know I'm very interested in this, and while I don't claim to have all the answers myself, I'm certainly always interested in seeing what other people have to say about it. Before it really jumps into setting up a campaign and how to manage them, the book first talks about its definition of a campaign and discusses three important aspects of an RPG campaign. And these are relationships, both between the PCs and NPCs; history, creating a shared world, a sense that your actions have an impact on the world; and finally, growth. And not just systemic growth, players gaining levels or XP or whatever happens in your particular system, but growth in terms of accumulated story and accumulating these relationships with NPCs and building upon this history building up layer upon layer in games. And it also discusses the roles of running a campaign and the final end goals, which are, let's face it, to entertain everyone, GMs and players, to have fun, to create a shared story or narrative, to grow and develop the characters, and to develop a real connection to these characters, to get into the headspace of the characters, if you will. So, how well do I think this book did? Well, in my conclusion, this book is extremely well written, and it renders down the often daunting task of managing a campaign into plain and easy to understand English. and it divides the information it does give you into sensible, bite-sized chunks that can be more easily digested while you're reading than a long diatribe. Each section of the book contains some great advice that will help any campaign, whether it's running that all-important first session, introducing the settings, PCs, establishing the story, that sort of thing, or whether it's rounding off an existing campaign, or, as the book recommends, planning how to round off a campaign that you're just starting in advance, so you don't have that awkward trying to staple on or hash up an ending at the last minute. One thing I really loved about this book, and as I'm sure you can probably tell, I'm quite a fan of it, is that it really highlighted the role that the GM plays in campaign management. It describes the GM as part investigator, finding out what the players want, part mediator, resolving any disputes, and the leader, moving the campaign forward. But it never loses sight of the fact that the GM should also be enjoying and participating in the game. And this is something I've seen quite often with GMs, and I know that I myself have been guilty of it in the past. You spend so much time thinking about how your players are going to enjoy the game, and obviously it's right, you should think about that to some extent, but sometimes you spend so long thinking about that you neglect your own enjoyment as a GM in the game. And a few sessions in, you find out that you're not really enjoying it, and your energy levels really start to plummet, and that can be the death knell, and has been, of many a campaign. Another useful thing in the book is that rather than just handing you a big wodge of advice, a huge chunk of information, each section provides a number of questions that should be considered by the aspiring campaign manager, and then it goes on to discuss the potential impact of those questions. And because these questions are highlighted in bold, it's really easy when you're trying to reference it to just flick through and pick out those points that you wanted to particularly look at. Campaign length and having a discussion about it up front is an element mentioned that has particular interest for me, since I've recently started running more finite campaigns, and I found it a good way to prevent the tapering off of RPG campaigns myself, so I'm glad to see that this is discussed in the book. The writing throughout the book is peppered with interesting anecdotes where the two authors discuss previous campaigns that they have run and how the lessons that this book imparts either did, or perhaps could have, helped in this situation. This is great because it allows you to get a feel for the information in a more sort of real world scenario and gives it a bit more gravitas and a bit more weight to the writing in the book. There's also handy sections where it talks about the various elements and how they can be played badly or how they can be played well. For instance, starting up a campaign, it may have a small section saying this is how the start of the campaign might run if it's handled badly, and this is how it might run if it's handled well, which is handy since it gives you more of an insight into what the GMs are talking about and places it in a sort of faux real world scenario. Even improvisation, as discussed in the book, is improved by a certain degree of preparation. Even the more improvisational author of the book has to admit that a certain level of preparation, whether you want to improvise, fly by the seat of your pants, whatever you call it, is necessary for any roleplay game to run successful. And more importantly, this preparation actually makes it easier on you, the GM, during a session. There's also handy little boxes highlighted by the title Danger Ahead that point out potential problems, sticking points or troubles with some of the advice that's offered in the book. And this is great. It's how many times when you're using a computer or something do you click on a troubleshooting or a help option? In some ways I think RPGs run on tabletop or via the internet or whatever can be far more complex than that. Yet seldom do we ever really see something that really just drills straight to the point and highlights and gives you this troubleshooting option. And I think these Danger Ahead boxes are a fantastic idea. There's some very useful tips on writing adventures based around 3 and 5 act models, all very interesting stuff. There's also an idea which I liked, which they describe as bookending an adventure, which is when you sandwich an adventure between two scenes at the start and the end that are not necessarily related to the main plot, but they give a window into the player characters' everyday lives and everyday happenings within the campaign world, expanding that background and that story a little more. And this is something that's often used in a procedural TV show, and I think that's a great idea. It's certainly something I'll be using in my future games. Amongst other things, there's useful advice on designing a supporting cast, maintaining continuity, running those first few important sessions, including a suggestion that you treat the first 3 sessions rather like the pilot of a TV show, and you allow players to tweak or alter their characters before the main season, the main game, is picked up and starts running. This is a great idea, and it's something I've been doing for a while myself in games, since you may design a character that you think is brilliant and does exactly what you want, but there's always a few little aspects that when you start playing it, you maybe think, oh, I wish I'd done this, or maybe I could change that a little bit. Giving the players a little bit of wiggle room at the start results in far happier players, and they get characters that they enjoy playing more, and you get a smoother game as a result of it. So, great stuff. There's a brief discussion on character growth and about how it's far more than just stats. It's about building on that story and that shared history. And there's a good bit of advice for preparing yourself for things such as absent players, which is some great advice in there. It's something I've suffered from recently, and it's certainly something I've started to prepare rules for. So I certainly suggest anyone who has players who are regularly absent or have uncertain schedules take a look at that section of the book. In conclusion, I think this is an excellent book that should be part of any GM's toolkit. The book's not instantly going to make you a better GM, but what it does do, and what it does very successfully, is it gives you the tools that you need and suggests options that you can use to hone your skills. I highly recommend it. And wanting to try this out again in a real world scenario, since my players are currently getting towards the end of the Rogue Trader campaign that I'm running, which will be wrapping up in the next half a dozen sessions, I shouldn't expect, I sat down with them all last night, had a brief chat about what we plan to do next, and we hashed it out using various methods and suggestions from the book, and quite surprisingly, we've ended up with the possibility that we may be running a Dark Sun campaign, the old D&D setting, the savage world of Athos, a desert world that has been ravaged by defiling magics. We're going to have the players as underdog heroes in a sort of Robin Hood style, trying to overthrow the corrupt sorcerer king that rules the city-state that is going to form the major base of operations for the player characters, and they're going to be outlaws operating on the fringes of society, possibly using some form of adaptation of the Dungeon World rules system. Now, this isn't a concept that I'd consider when we first started having this conversation, but through hashing a few things out and discussing what people saw as their deal breakers, the elements they really wanted in the campaign, and what things they're prepared to be a bit more flexible on. This is a tactic discussed in the book in question. We were able to arrive at this setting that everyone seems quite keen about. I'm certainly looking forward to running, and we're all really anticipating, and I'm sure it'll be a great deal of fun. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a mark of high praise indeed that the book suggestions were that useful in coming up with a new campaign setting for us. So I can't say any more than 2 thumbs fresh. Highly recommend this book. If you're at all interested in campaign management, if you're thinking of gifting someone with the gift of a new campaign moving on through Christmas and the New Year, remember, a campaign is not just for Christmas, then I would suggest that you certainly have a look at this book. I hope you've all enjoyed this video, and if you have, you'll click on like and subscribe. I'll put a link to all relevant information, and including where this book can be obtained, down below. If you have any comments, please either leave them on the Google Plus pages or put them down below on YouTube. And I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all.